Welcome to another episode of Unscripted with SST, the LinkedIn live show where we deep dive into the real, unfiltered world of IT, cybersecurity, and business technology. Brought to you by Secure Strategic Technology, we are here to cut through the noise, share expert insights, and tackle the challenges shaping the future of managed IT services. Live, raw, and unscripted. Our guests today are two members from the SST team, Troy and Bo. Thanks for joining me here today, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good to be
Thank
here.
you. Yeah. And both of you have extensive experience in information technology in all different levels and in different disciplines for sure, which will be valuable in today's conversation. So with that being said, why don't we just jump right into it? So today's show is really, we're going to be discussing a little bit about when to hand off IT responsibilities to the IT professionals. Whether you're a business owner still resetting passwords in your systems or applications, or if your office manager is moonlighting as IT and doing maintenance on the firewall. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when you outgrow this type of IT setup and then what next to do. Sound good to you guys?
Yep.
Sounds great.
Do it.
Awesome. So then I guess I'll kind of start out and I'll let you guys make some comments on this too. But what we're really talking about is who's doing what in these environments, right? We're talking about small businesses. We're talking about organizations that have resource constraints for sure. Everybody's doing their primary job, but they're also doing a secondary job, and oftentimes it is in IT. So what are we talking about here specifically? Maybe the owner or the general manager is still doing all the ordering of the hardware and maintaining the vendor relationships, right? Ordering servers from Dell, talking to the Dell rep, yada, yada, yada. And another example that we often encounter is that bookkeeper or office manager or somebody that's in operations is the go-to tech person. Like they are the resident technical expert, right? We see that's a very common theme. These folks have not had any formal training, but yet they are the go-to person in the organization. What else? What other kind of scenarios that we see in these environments where you're internalizing IT with your existing resources? Maybe one person knows the Wi-Fi password and they're on vacation. For that matter, it could be any password, right? Maybe it could be an administrator password or some, password to get into a critical business application, right? They're on vacation. You don't have any mechanism to get into that system. Very common there as well. And then, maybe one of the last scenarios that we encounter, you have several people, all non-technical, accessing a server, making changes to the server, maybe that the business requires, but really disjointed, right? Like one person needs this edit made or change made, and so they'll go and do it. And then another person, for some particular reason, needs to make a different change. What comes to my mind is maybe in the firewall, right? We need to poke a hole in the firewall to allow this application to do this, right? Like that, having multiple people in that environment is generally not a recommendation that we would have, but we do see that, right? And they're getting things done because they need to.
Well, and the other part too, Tracy, just to interject, is you see that a lot just because it becomes easier, right?
Yes.
Hey, I don't have to deal with this, so I'm just going to give you access. And if you need to change something, then they have access. And then they give the next person access because, well, I know enough to support it, but then you got all these hands in there managing and configuring it, and suddenly it's not quite set up the way it should be. But it was easier to support because, you know what, I was the gatekeeper. So I'm going to hand it off to somebody else, and now you got all multiple hands in there, and everybody's kind of configuring things and doing it their own ways.
Yeah, for sure. And so this is like very common, right? Like people are getting things done, which we can appreciate, and it seems to be working. The problem is this works until it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when we encounter scenarios where it doesn't work, it's a bigger deal, right? A big issue happened or a cyber event happened, or there's some significant, something significant is impacting the business. So I think that's a great segue into maybe, the next discussion point here. And it's really Do you guys, this question, I'll ask you this question first to you, Bo. Do you, in your experience, have you encountered like certain signs that an organization would put off as to like suggest that they have now outgrown this type of internal IT?
Yeah. There certainly is. I mean, what we kind of talked about the one before, kind of that indication is you got a lot of people in there administering systems they shouldn't be just because of ease of use. So there's like no central admin and nobody kind of guiding and setting up systems the way that they need to be. Certainly is one thing. Kind of those access controls become a little bit loosey goosey. You get, you're not having the right security protocols in place, like multi-factor, like you should be having, wherever you can these days. That stuff just isn't turned on. And some of the reason it's not turned on is because, you know what, if I have that on, it's a little bit more support. I get some noise. So, you know what, let's just turn that off, right? Let's set some simple passwords because everybody can remember that and I'm not going to get some calls and they can still do their jobs, right? So you see that's one big indication. Another thing
I was going to say, to your point there, if you walk into an environment and 90% of it is local admin on the desktop, that's a problem.
Right? Yep. And it's done because it's easy, right? Less support stuff. You just don't have time. If you're the one, you're doing dual jobs, you're doing the IT work and you're like leading the company, I don't want to deal with support stuff. Like that's not valuable for the company. So, hey, this is easier. I'm not going to deal with that support stuff. Not set up in a good situation. I was going to say another thing that I see from companies that, kind of this scenario is an indicator. It's they're using some legacy technologies because that's what they're comfortable with. They've always used those. It's kind of homegrown and I don't really want to change this and do things necessarily completely different because that's going to fall on me. I have to do this a little bit and I'm comfortable and I know I can support what's there. I don't have as much incentive to change and do things the right way and adopt new systems because that's going to be more work to administer. So, you know what? Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Like you see that a lot for these kind of things. And some of it is because they don't know what else is out there, right? They're spending time doing the business work and not the technology work. So some of it is, I don't know what I don't know, but then some of it is like, well, I know that, but I'm also not really excited about making the changes on these systems that I know to be able to monitor. And then kind of the other one we see all the time is like shadow IT with cloud services all the time. Easy to sign up. People just sign up and start using different things, right? I signed up for, now AI is a big thing, right? So people are going to log in and just start using that. Well, what kind of security controls are on it? What kind of data is in there? And they're just doing their own thing. I just have my email address and I signed up for an account and I started using it. And, sometimes you use, well, that's costing the company. We're paying $200 for this service. We already have this over here. But that shadow IT really starts to get built up too when there's no kind of, centralized administration and ownership and direction within the company because it's, that's secondary, right? We're running the business, but we're kind of taking care of IT. We have to use IT. Just not necessarily knowing exactly everything that's happening in the environment because you're focused elsewhere, right? That dual focus becomes a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that, Bud. It's great information. Troy, I'd ask you the same question. Any follow-up to any of Bo's comments or anything new there that you want to point out to our audience?
Yeah, when I go into an environment that, clearly is, I guess, overgrown, their history of how they did IT, it's usually reacting and not planning, right? Whether it's an incident or a user request, they're just executing them as they come in. They're not really looking at the long-term plans or how they should be doing things. That creates a problem in a couple areas. First of all, users, usually there's a delay, right? So they're going to go find other ways to do things. This goes back to, maybe making some credential changes to make it easier, or users will just find another path, and then it creates, different people are doing things differently, right? We're not all, accessing these files the same way because, I created a ticket to the owner and that didn't get back to me, so I'm just going to go this way. So it creates some inconsistencies in the environment. The planning is a huge part of it. Whether it's planning a change in your ERP system or your plan, a life cycle refresh, understanding how that impacts other parts of your business is important. And when you're busy because you have another role at the company, such as an owner or controller or whatever, you're not really sometimes looking holistically how a change here might impact something over here. If you're going to move your main application to the cloud, there's, impacts to other aspects of the business. Does that mean I have to move my file server to the cloud, right? How do we access the content? So I think that gets lost, right? When somebody has a role that is, more important, such as an owner or somebody that is, revenue generating in the company is also trying to do strategic thinking, it gets lost. And that's when things get missed.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so you kind of hit on a theme that we talk about a lot on Unscripted with SST, and that's reactive versus proactive. We love that. That's awesome. Anything else to add here for us, Troy, with signs?
Yeah, signs. I mean, maybe one of the things that's important is to set it and forget it, right? I mean, I think people will put things in place and, we installed this backup system. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But, who's monitoring that, right? And if backups fail, there's no responsibility or accountability there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. I think a perfect segue, I'll just make a little comment, like maybe a very quick cybersecurity assessment could also be very revealing as to whether your internal IT has outgrown the capabilities of meeting the company's needs, right? And I guess I would bring that into the next question here. When we operate this way with IT, can you talk a little specific around some of the risks that your organization would be exposed to? Troy, I'd throw that one to you first.
So yeah, some of the things, updating, maintaining your environment, right? Patching, security updates, go back to the statement I said, set it, forget. A lot of people think we can just do auto updates. Well, who's monitoring that? Is there some sort of reporting that, is being looked at to make sure these things are actually occurring, right? So I think patching is one thing we see that often is not done. People think it's being done, but when you actually look under the covers, there are some gaps. Maybe 90% of the environment, but then you may have some security, some vectors of attack that could be lying there that they're unaware of. People, EDR is a big thing, endpoint detection. So a lot of people have it, it's installed, but is it being monitored, right? Is it running on every asset in your company? Is there a report to indicate that there's a problem? Where is that going to? Is it going to a ticketing system, an email, a text? How are we knowing that it's actually working? Is it installed on everything? If you have EDR, and your cyber insurance requires you have EDR, you check the box. If you have one machine that doesn't have EDR on it, even if that's not the vector of attack, and you have, a ransomware or something, and they come in and do forensics, even if that's not the vector of attack, that machine, they may not cover it because you were not 100% compliant to EDR in your environment. So, making sure endpoints are actually protected is a big thing, that we see gets neglected. And then users are the weakest link. So the cybersecurity user awareness training, right? That's something that some companies do. But again, it goes back to reporting. When you run these campaigns, are people actually taking the training? Are they passing the tests? Who's accountable if somebody isn't? User awareness training is, a complex environment, right, that continually changes. There's new ways of attack constantly coming out, whether it be AI or human, and these training programs are addressing, these new different concepts. So it's something that, can't be done once and check the box. It's got to be continual. So those are some areas that we see, when there's not, somebody assigned directly to the technology and IT, that those things start to get neglected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It really, what I see, like, kind of the theme here, right? It's there's not enough time to do all this work. So what's going to happen? I got to keep things running. I'm going to deal with the reactive stuff, and not everything that should be getting done is getting done. I mean, the other part that I see, like when you talk about these security gaps, I've heard it plenty of times talking with customers, is like all this compliance. Like there's so much compliance out there these days that customers, people should be looking at and making sure that they're adhering to, like, cybersecurity insurance. Like, I can't qualify for cybersecurity insurance. It's just too much. I don't have enough coverage. And it's because all of these security gaps that you were just talking about, Troy, those aren't in place. They can't meet it, but they don't have enough time to go, and they don't know what to be doing, to address all those needs so they can have the coverage and mitigate that risk that's out there. It happens all the time. So
I see a lot of people when I go talk to them that initially say they don't need to have compliance. But then when you go through what kind of data they have, where their data is stored, who has access to it, you start to find out, they have PHI, they have customer information, they may have credit cards or any, it could be healthcare stuff. They do have compliance regulations. They just, answer it that way because they want to avoid the question, right? Until somebody forces their hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And just even compliance from a contractual compliance, right? What do they promise to their customers? Like you said, some of the data, but just like, their service guarantees, like what have you promised in there? What are you using from others? Like your vendors, like what have you guaranteed? Like, is that stuff being met? And people don't read the fine print. They don't know what's out there. And a lot of this stuff is just, the best practices in cybersecurity. Reasonable. Are you taking those reasonable cybersecurity measures? Hear that all the time, right? What are those? But if you're having those shared responsibilities and you're running a business, you certainly don't have time to delve into your cybersecurity controls and like, what are we going to have there? Like, how do you know all of that? It becomes overwhelming.
Another thing I see, very rarely are any process documented around IT, right? If it's being run by, an owner or somebody that's got another role at the company, whether it be your incident response plan or disaster recovery or business continuity, these things are almost never documented when I go into an environment. And if they are, they may have not been touched in years, right? So everything's different now. So I think that's a clear indicator that role maybe needs to move to another resource.
I was going to say the same thing, Troy. Another little phrase we like to use around SST is discipline process. There is no discipline process in these environments that we're talking about. And again, understandably so, because it's a secondary role for them. But unfortunately, the landscape that we're in from a technology standpoint, we can no longer treat it as a secondary role for somebody. It's just the risk is too large. Mm-hmm. So maybe some other risks that we should touch on here. Obviously, the downtime, the risk associated with downtime, right? When you don't have resident experts, when you don't maybe have access to backup equipment, like you guys want to touch on that or extrapolate on that a bit, the downtime risks?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that come to mind is one, you got the one person who's not available because they're doing something more important. They're the only ones that, they set it up a long time ago. It's legacy technology. They're the ones who know it. So we need them to go fix this error. Like they're not available, right? It's one person, like you said, not documented. There's no processes in place. So it becomes a bigger issue than it needs to be because it's out of date and it's configured in this special way and nobody really knows. It's kind of this black box mystery. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing that happens with those, right? It's bigger than it needs to be. Troy, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, just another aspect to that is, somebody isn't maintaining their license and their maintenance contracts. And then when something happens, whether it be in an application or maybe a piece of hardware, we can't get support, right? We didn't pay this maintenance contract. We can't call this hypervisor company to find out what's going on. We're on our own. Or, we didn't keep up our server or storage maintenance agreement and we have an outage. Guess what? They're not coming out the next day to fix it. We have to go buy a new one and completely restore it. So things like that, if people are overwhelmed and aren't keeping up to speed on those are other gaps that occur.
Yeah, that's great. So just one last thing on the risk, like something that we don't probably think about, right? And I would say it's burnout. So we're tasking people that have primary roles, as we talked about, with very important IT-related job functions, not their primary skill set. And this can be fatiguing and very stressful for people. I mean, so burnout and turnover is a real thing in some of these organizations. Do you guys agree? And have you seen this?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've seen it, I've seen it even from an IT person that, is being tasked to maybe run IT for an organization that's too large for one person, right? It's not always just somebody that has another job. It could be that they're not we don't have enough full-time employees to handle what we currently have. If it's one person and they're doing 200 servers, the same thing's going to happen. Things are getting neglected. It's going to be reactive and not proactive. And, that creates burnout, especially if, there's any downtime or, incidents are at a high level, right? And then that creates stress.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like insufficient resources, whether it's in the form of FTEs or technology itself, right? Any other comments with regards to risks associated with these types of IT environments? Okay. Well, then with that being said, let's kind of move into the next discussion point here. I guess when we, as an organization in one of these small businesses, we get to a point where we're like, okay, we realize we got to do something different. But I feel like sometimes companies in this situation, they're stuck. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to, transition the responsibilities off of them and their staff onto professionals. Can you guys again just talk about maybe some critical points that need to be addressed or steps that we should be taking to make this transition from internal IT to some professionals?
Sure. You want to talk, Troy?
Well, I can start off understanding your landscape, right? Really getting down to what your inventory is, both from a hardware asset and a software asset, right? Do we have, whose ownership of these devices and these software applications? What are they doing for business outcomes? Is there duplication of, technology, right? Somebody uses this application and somebody uses this application. Could we, trim that down to one? Really, finding out where you sit, right? And I think it's just inventory and all your stuff. What do you need to do your lines of business? And that's a good start, is just getting that in place. And sometimes it's eye-opening. You don't really realize a lot of times how many, maybe older hardware assets you have in your environment, and maybe how many software assets really people are using or not using, and you're paying for them. So that's where I would start.
That's great.
I think the other part, when you kind of going from that inventory, you got to figure out, okay, so this is everything that we have. Well, then it's what gaps we have, what don't we have, what should we be doing? What are we missing? That proactive work, what needs to get done for this environment? Where are problems at, right? That understanding what you're not doing too is a big part of that. Where are the biggest potential issues that we have with IT and how we're using it and what impact that would have on the business. The business owner they're the one that's going to know that, right? So okay, how are we using this? Where do we have those issues, right? Once you understand that kind of stuff, then yeah, okay, now we got an okay lay of the land, because we really have to know what's out there. Then it's, where do you go from there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Anything else? Any other thoughts you have, Troy, with regards to, how we make this transition?
Yeah, you got to find out, what's next, right? There's a lot of options for companies out there, whether they staff internally, whether they, go to an MSP, whether they co-manage it. Some of it has to do with the type of technology you have, your location, maybe in your business requirements. Usually there's a cost analysis done with it. One of the things with an MSP, you don't have the risk of training up an important resource that then could take that knowledge and leave the company, right? There's a sunk cost and that type of thing. It could be, how much chatter is there in our company? Do we need somebody on site? If so, how often, right? So I think the next step is really, how am I going to resolve this with resources and, figure out what makes the most sense for your organization.
Yeah, right. Take a very strategic approach. We like that word around here too, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Bo, any last comments with regards to this transition to professionals?
Well, I think you got a pretty good lay of the land there. Now, then once you kind of make that decision, right, it's got to go off the hands to somebody else, right? It's not just oh, I hired somebody, there you go, right? There's a transition period to get somebody else up to speed with what you've done, what you need. So that's kind of from an MSP perspective, a lot of the onboarding, right? We're going to get our stuff out there. We're going to have our tools. We're going to learn about the business. We're going to do our own homework, try to figure out like what the challenges are out there, and then figure out like, okay, what do we need to do going forward? What is our plan? Do we have a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan out there, and need to figure out like the really important things where we need to start addressing some of the risks that we found in the environment? That's how you start to transition. There's an operational, the support stuff is generally some of the easier stuff to transition. You're going to hire somebody with technical skill that can do the break fix stuff, but you're also going to need somebody strategically to put you in that position to know this is the order of changes we need to make to get you where you need to be, right? So IT is really helping support the strategy in moving that business forward, rather than just like it's a necessary evil. Everybody has to use technology these days, and we just need to keep it running. Well, don't just keep it running. Make it useful for the business.
That's great. So we're inside 4 minutes here now. I guess if you guys could give me each a really quick real life example. Troy, you want to talk a little bit about where you encountered this in the past?
Yeah, just quick. I was at a healthcare organization meeting with them for the first time. It was a smaller clinic type thing. And they had delegated their IT to one of their providers that was the youngest, right, that maybe had the most technology knowledge. But what I found out once I got in there, a lot of their systems were unlocked. They have HIPAA regulations. They were on multiple platforms doing different things. They had all passwords saved so you could, basically get into any admin account by hitting the down arrow, because everything was cached in Chrome. They were on Microsoft 365. They were on Chrome. They were using a different application for their meeting, Zoom. I think we see that they don't know what to do, so they just have all these different platforms. Bo talked about that a little bit earlier. And then people do things different ways. They don't know where things are. Things aren't secure. Nothing was documented. So in this case, were they actually able to do their jobs? Yes, but they had a gaping hole in security, and they were completely inefficient because everything was on different platforms. So that's a perfect example where they need some help.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Troy. And how about you, Bo?
Well, I mean, Troy kind of painted the general scenario, what we see with when this stuff happens, right? The systems just aren't set up the way that they should be. It's those workflow impacts. I mean, a couple come to mind, but where it's even like you're depending on the president of the company. There's one where they kind of, the president started out more of an IT person, operations, right? Had an interest in technology, and then just had been with the company long enough, worked the way up, and eventually was running the company and still hadn't delegated those IT tasks to somebody else because they knew the systems. They were still involved and completely dependent on the president of the business to do the day-to-day troubleshooting, to make network configuration changes, to do like project implementation, setting up new servers and new systems. And it's, just such a waste of time for somebody in that position and what they should be doing strategically for that company. And they're spending it fixing, a login to Microsoft Windows on a workstation. Like it just, time-wise doesn't make sense, but that's the way it's always been, right? They're the ones. And the challenge with this, like we talked about before, is because of that long-term experience and knowing that technology, they're generally the quickest one to fix it. So it never gets transitioned to somebody else because they want things fixed. They need things fixed. So they can do it quicker. They just, they're the ones that set it up so they can troubleshoot it. And then it never goes on to the next person because they don't fix the root problem. There's not time for that.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And I think all three of us have encountered that scenario for sure. So we're basically at the end of our time here today. That wraps up the episode, today's episode of Unscripted with SST. Huge thanks to you guys. Thanks for jumping on and talking about what's necessary to pass that IT baton. For those listening, please drop a comment or connect with us for a free assessment. We'd be happy to help you, discover, maybe where you're lacking and how you building a strategy to move away to something different. So connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Follow SST for more insights. You got questions, we got strategy. Catch you next time on Unscripted with SST. Thank you.
Thank you.